Hey guy. Tonight we're going to talk about the only time in European military history when the Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte himself, was forced to retreat from the battlefield by bunnies, yes, actual rabbits, and not just a few of them, hundreds, possibly thousands, furry, fast, and unexpectedly fearless. Now you're probably lying there thinking, wait, is this one of those stories that turns out to be a metaphor? Nope, this really happened. The man who reshaped Europe, who stared down coalitions and crossed the Alps like it was no big deal, once had to make a hasty getaway from a stampede of rabbits with no known political affiliations. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I'm always curious to see which time zones we're floating through together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in France. It's summer around 1807. The wars are going well mostly. You've just signed the treaties of Tilsit, so Russia and Prussia are playing nice. At least for now. The vibe is celebratory. You, as a member of Napoleon's close circle of congrats, by the way, are invited to a grand event to mark the victory. Not a battle reenactment. Not a medal ceremony. Not even a parade. A rabbit hunt. Yes, a post-war rabbit hunt. Because when you've conquered half of Europe, sometimes what you really need is an afternoon in the countryside with a picnic basket, some wine, and a few fluffy targets. Napoleon's hunts were, shall we say, a bit more curated than your usual rustic outing. The game was often pre-arranged, meaning the animals were caught and placed ahead of time. It's more theater than sport, but it helps the optics. The emperor gets to look powerful, quick, decisive, even when the opponent is a rabbit. You arrive early at the field where the hunt will take place. The sun is bright but not aggressive, there's that dry rustle of summer grass, and the staff is bustling about setting up tables, uncorking bottles, and fluffing lemon napkins. Someone has even brought a folding chair worthy of a small throne. You glance toward Napoleon's carriage as it pulls up. It's that custom-made job with the polished black doors, imperial crests, and probably enough velvet inside to upholster a modest opera house. The emperor steps out, dressed not in his usual battle gear but something more civilian, though still tailored within an inch of its life. He's relaxed, maybe even smiling. That's when you notice something odd. There's a big wooden cage. Actually, no, multiple cages, each about waist height, and you realize they're full of rabbits. Dozens and dozens of them. You think, that's a lot of rabbits. Enter Berthier, Louis Alexander Berthier, chief of staff and all-around overachiever. He's the man who arranged today's festivities. Historical records suggest that he took the job very seriously, perhaps too seriously. When Napoleon said he wanted a rabbit hunt, Berthier heard, procure a small kingdom of rabbits. And so he did, depending on who you ask, and historians still debate this. The number of rabbits brought in that day ranged from 300 to over 3,000. That's not a typo. That's a soft, fluffy army. Here's where it starts to go wrong. See, Berthier didn't exactly source wild rabbits. Wild rabbits, as it turns out, are tricky to wrangle and tend to run away, which is great if you're hunting them. Instead, Berthier opted for the domestic kind. You know, the type that associates humans with food, and perhaps, in this case, sees a man in a hat as a particularly large walking carrot. At this point, the staff begins to open the cages. You're standing there, a little sun, drunk from the wine, trying to get your footing in the tall grass, and suddenly you hear it, a soft patter, then another, then many. The rabbits do not scatter. They do not flee. They do not run for cover. They charge, not in disorganized chaos, but in what can only be described as a determined, wave-like assault formation. Fluffball after fluffball barrels toward the emperor, brushing past your boots, hopping over picnic baskets, navigating like tiny missiles of fur. You freeze. Because this was not in the itinerary. Napoleon, for his part, does what any reasonable world leader would do when confronted with a fluffy mutiny. He tries to shoo them away. Reports suggest he waved his riding crop and even tried yelling. The rabbits remain unimpressed. They leap onto his legs, into his coat. Some apparently even make it into the carriage. Someone drops a wine glass. Someone else mutters, "Mon Dieu." You watch as the world's most famous general is quite literally overrun by rabbits. It's important to pause here and note that historians disagree about some of the details. Was Napoleon fully surrounded? Did he trip? Did a rabbit make it onto his hat? Some say yes. Some say probably not. One academic even posits that the story was later exaggerated by Napoleon's enemies as a kind of fluffy propaganda campaign. What everyone does agree on is that Napoleon retreated. Not metaphorically, not in strategy. He turned around, got in his carriage, and left. The rabbit hunt was officially over. And you're still standing there in a field of scampering bunnies, watching the imperial dust clouds settle, wondering how this will play out in the official report. Accidental overthrow by rogue herbivores is not a phrase the press office is prepared for, but you'll remember it forever. You ride back toward town in the same carriage convoy as the emperor. The mood, let's call it politely, quiet. You're trying to keep your expression neutral, eyes fixed on the passing fields, because making eye contact with Napoleon right now feels like poking a lion with a feather duster. From time to time someone coughs. Not a real cough, more like a throat clearing of panic and secondhand embarrassment. You think about asking, so, who's writing the official account of today's events, but wisely stay silent. Napoleon doesn't speak. His arms are crossed. His foot is bouncing, a barely contained rhythmic tap of irritation. He's a man calculating the exact number of people who just witnessed his fuzzy downfall, and how many of them might need to be mysteriously reassigned to Siberia. But let's take a moment, as the carriage clatters along, to understand why this wasn't just a hilarious afternoon gone wrong. Because in Napoleon's world, symbolism mattered. Image was everything. This was a man who, just a couple of years earlier, crowned himself emperor in front of the Pope. Literally took the crown and placed it on his own head. That was a carefully crafted message. I bow to no one. Every painting, every coin, every speech was designed to reinforce the idea that Napoleon was power incarnate, the immovable center of a continent in motion. So being chased off a field by a bunny blitzkrieg? Yeah, not ideal. Now, before we return to your awkward carriage ride, let's rewind a bit. Let's zoom out. Let's look at what was happening around 1807. Why this rabbit hunt, silly as it seems, landed at a strange turning point in Napoleon's career. See, by this time, Napoleon had pretty much steamrolled most of mainland Europe. Austria had been dealt with, Prussia humbled, and Russia, well, Russia was pretending to be his friend after the Treaty of Tilsit. France was riding high. Napoleon was at the peak of his power. He was by many accounts invincible. And invincibility can do weird things to a guy. Historians still debate this, but many believe Napoleon began to enjoy his image more than his reality. He built palaces, staged elaborate events, and surrounded himself with yes-men in velvet. One scholar even suggested Napoleon's appetite for grandeur had outpaced his need for war. So a hunting party with hundreds of rabbits. Honestly, not that strange in the grand scheme of post-Tilsit Napoleon. The man had just redrawn Europe's borders. He deserved some leisure, right? The problem is leisure is unpredictable. Leisure is messy. Especially when your chief of staff doesn't know the difference between game and petting zoo. And that's what you're thinking about as your carriage bounces over a pothole and Napoleon sighs heavily beside you. You glance at Berthier in the opposite seat. The man is sweating in ways previously unrecorded by science. His wig has shifted slightly to the left. He's mumbling something about weather conditions and unforeseen rabbit psychology. You wish you had popcorn. Of course, no one ever wrote an official report about this. You won't find a scroll in the French archives titled Incident Lapin Ambush. But letters, memoirs, and odd little footnotes in contemporary accounts preserve the story. It gets mentioned in the margins. The kind of tale people whisper about during long dinners, unsure whether they're allowed to laugh. One source even claims that Napoleon himself, months later, joked about the event, saying something like, "I've conquered kings. I suppose it's only fair I lose to rabbits." That could be apocryphal. Historians disagree. Some say he never spoke of it again. What we do know is that after the bunny debacle, Napoleon didn't hold many more symbolics. Coincidence? You decide. Now let's shift our focus for a moment, because you're not just here to relive rabbit chaos. You're here to sleep, right? And nothing lulls you into dreamland like a gentle tangent about the history of game hunting as royal theater. Yes, we're going there. You see, for centuries, literally thousands of years, powerful leaders have used the act of hunting not just as recreation, but as a way to prove dominance. In medieval England, for example, forest laws were designed to preserve huge swaths of land for noble use only. If a commoner was caught hunting a deer, that could get you hanged. Or worse, sent to a place like the Tower of London where the beds were extremely drafty and the breakfast buffet non-existent. In the Chinese Tang dynasty, emperors conducted highly ritualized hunts with military-style formations. It was part military drill, part nature walk, part political theater. In the Mughal Empire, There were royal hunting expeditions with entire tent cities set up just for the weekend. Think glamping, but with elephants and really dramatic hats. So Napoleon hosting a rabbit hunt wasn't weird, it was expected. What was weird was that instead of reinforcing his power, it unraveled it. It's like staging a concert where your grand piano explodes on the first note. And yet, strangely, that's part of what makes this story so oddly comforting. Because in a world of relentless ambition, endless wars, and statues built to last centuries, a single afternoon in the French countryside reminded everyone of one simple truth. Sometimes it's just not your day. Whether you're a general, a student, or a YouTube listener trying to fall asleep, you too might get swarmed by unexpected forces and have to make a quiet, humbled exit. And that's okay. Back in the carriage, Napoleon finally speaks. Just one word. You glance at Berthier. He scrambles, opens a bottle, pours into a goblet like his life depends on it. Napoleon takes a long sip. No one breathes. Then, softly, the emperor mutters, "Next time, ducks." The next morning, you wake to the sounds of Versailles birds chirping over well-manicured hedges, servants bustling in linen slippers, and somewhere in the distance, a very tired stable boy loudly explaining to someone that no, they have not found all the rabbits yet. Your head's a little foggy. Not from the wine. Okay? Maybe a little from the wine, but mostly from the memory of the previous day. You were there. You saw the bunnies. And now, you're trying to make sense of it all. It's not every day you watch an emperor get outmaneuvered by herbivores. You pull your coat tighter as you step out into the garden. The morning dew clings to your boots, and the sun has just started to warm the marble statues that have seen far worse than yesterday's chaos. Somewhere behind you, you hear Napoleon pacing, which is both expected and slightly terrifying. See, today is about damage control. It turns out when you're the most powerful man in Europe, even a minor, fluffy PR disaster needs to be handled delicately. Because while Napoleon may have survived Waterloo years from now, if Twitter had existed in 1807, the hashtag A Rabbit Revenge would be trending immediately. Let's talk for a second about Napoleon's reputation. By this point in his career, he wasn't just a military leader. He was a myth. He had stories swirling around him like perfume that he never slept, that he remembered the names of every soldier he ever promoted, that he could recite entire pages of Roman legal code from memory. Some of those might even be true. And when people believe you're invincible, even the silliest thing can chip the armor. Now, this is where we meet one of the most interesting figures in this entire bunny-shaped narrative of Charles Joseph de Bosset. He's not in your typical Napoleon documentaries, but he was a chamberlain, a kind of glorified event planner / secretary who also happened to love writing things down. His memoirs include several curious moments, and while he doesn't mention the rabbit ambush directly, many believe he was nearby that day. Historians think some of the more personal accounts of the event trace back to him. What's fascinating is this. Even in an age where newspapers were still the realm of gentlemen and revolutions, the court gossiped, and the story of Napoleon and the bunnies. Oh, it spread. Quietly, but gleefully, like spilled tea on a white tablecloth. Here's a strange twist. Ready for your obscure fun fact of the night? Rabbits, in 18th and 19th century France, were considered symbolic. They represented both abundance and cowardice. Yeah, you heard that right. The same animal could mean you're lucky and rich, and to run away too much. It depended on context. Very French, no. So when Napoleon gets chased by hundreds of bunnies, it could be seen as a sign of plenty or an omen of retreat. People interpreted it both ways. And that's the thing about powerful people. Everything they do becomes a metaphor. You sneeze, it's a sign of divine displeasure. You trip on a step, clearly the ancestors are warning you. You're attacked by rabbits. Well, interpretations abound. You lean against a stone bench, watching the gardeners rake up what looks like discarded cabbage from yesterday's chaos. You can't help but wonder, where did all those bunnies go? Some were caught. Some escaped into the woods. And rumor has it some were adopted by staff. There's even an unverifiable anecdote about a particular rabbit, small and gray, that became the unofficial mascot of the imperial kitchen. They named him Marengo Dux. Probably not true, but wouldn't it be lovely if it were? Anyway, let's talk for a second about the logistics of the event. Because here's where things get even more ridiculous. Berthier, Napoleon's ever dutiful chief of staff, had been told to procure rabbits for the grand imperial hunt. But sourcing hundreds, maybe thousands of wild rabbits on short notice, not easy. So what did he do? He bought tame rabbits. Docile, sweet, domesticated creatures used to being fed, not chased. Now here's where things get adorably tragic. These rabbits, upon being released from their cages, did not scatter into the underbrush like wild prey. No, they did what they were trained to do. They saw people. They associated people with food, and they ran toward them. This is not a legend. This is not folklore. Multiple eyewitnesses confirmed the rabbits charged. In the words of one very confused valet, it was as if the grass itself began to hop. Napoleon, expecting a noble hunt, ended up being swarmed by affectionate little animals expecting carrots. He reportedly tried to shoo them, then push them away. Then, when that failed, he turned and retreated fast. The carriages were right there, but so were the bunnies. And this is where it gets cinematic. One account says the rabbits divided like a military unit. Some rushed the emperor directly, others flanked. It's probably exaggerated, but let's be honest, that kind of drama deserves an Oscar. You imagine it now. The Emperor of France, boots soaked with summer mud, arms flailing like a child chased by pigeons in a park. The soldiers unsure whether to laugh or salute. And in the background, Berthier, realizing with horror that his career might now be measured in minutes. And you're just standing there, too stunned to move, too polite to laugh, too respectful to point. But internally, you're going to be telling this story for the rest of your life. As the sun climbs higher, you stroll back toward the palace. Napoleon has gone inside. Rumor says he's having breakfast and not speaking to anyone. Berthier, meanwhile, has reportedly offered to resign twice. Both times denied. Mostly because no one wants to take his place. You overhear two servants discussing what to do with the leftover cabbages. One suggests starting a soup. The other mutters, "Feed them to the survivors." And then they both laugh, quietly, carefully. Because in Napoleon's court, you never knew who might be listening. Before you head inside, you pause to pet a small brown rabbit sitting under a laurel bush. It doesn't run. It just blinks up at you. You whisper, "You won, didn't you?" And for just a moment, you swear it nods. You're in the hallway now, the cool marble under your boots still holding the morning's chill. The curtains flutter in the breeze, and servants pass with silver trays and side-eye glances. The emperor is awake, but no one's quite sure what mood he's in. A general rule when serving Napoleon: don't bring up rabbits. Not even once. But you're not just any court observer. You've got the front row seat to a moment of absurdity that history books barely mention. And now, the real question starts bouncing around in your mind like a bunny on too much espresso. How did this even happen? Today, you've got a new mission. You're retracing the steps of the event's planner, Berthier, and trying to piece together exactly how an imperial hunting party became the world's most elite carrot delivery service. You head for the kitchens first, because every good disaster has breadcrumbs, and in Versailles, they usually start near food. Now, here's your cold-cut history snack of the day. In early 19th century France, organizing a royal hunt was big business, not just a hobby for the bored aristocracy. These events were meant to showcase control power, and yes, man's dominance over nature. A good hunt was a political performance, a statement, and Napoleon, always image-conscious, wanted this one to be perfect. Berthier, the man tasked with organizing the festivities, was no stranger to planning under pressure. As Napoleon's chief of staff, he'd orchestrated entire campaigns across Europe. But dealing with weather soldiers and marching orders is very different from herding rabbits. You walk past crates still half full of cabbages, carrots, and what appears to be a very confused duck. A KitchenAid waves awkwardly at you, muttering something about, "Don't go near the coop." You don't ask. Instead, you glance at Berthier's logistics notes left scattered on the oak table. Here's what you learn: he originally ordered 300 wild rabbits from various farms near Paris. When only 120 arrived, and most were too young or too dead, he panicked. In a last-minute frenzy, he sent aides to a monastery in the countryside known for raising tame rabbits for food and fur. Ah yes, the monks. Didn't see that plot twist coming, did you? Turns out, monks in 1807 had some of the best rabbit breeding programs in France. Their rabbits were robust, well-fed, and absolutely not wild. When Berthier's men showed up with coin and a royal decree, the monks were only too happy to sell half their hutch. They even offered tips. Feed them cabbage. Talk to them gently. Don't scare them. Berthier, he just nodded, tossed the monks a satchel of France, and rushed back to make sure the wine glasses were polished. Huge mistake. Now here's where the story dips into maybe it happened, maybe it didn't territory. One eyewitness claimed Berthier forgot to brief the handlers that the rabbits were tame. Another version suggests the handlers knew but assumed they'd still behave like prey once released into an open field. Historians still argue over this. Some say it's proof of Napoleon's court becoming increasingly out of touch. Others think it's just a funny side note. But regardless, the result was the same. The moment the cages were opened, instead of darting into the hedges, the rabbits ran toward the emperor. Because they were hungry, and they thought he had snacks. Let's take a moment here for another tasty bite of trivia. Did you know that during this era, rabbits weren't seen as cute pets? They were economic assets. For most rural households in France, a few rabbits meant steady protein, warm pelts, and easy trade. In fact, during famines, French peasant families often relied more on rabbits than chickens. But in cities, especially among the wealthy, rabbits were kinda weird. There's even a royal letter from the late 1700s that calls them too eager, too frantic, and wholly undignified for courtly company. A perfect foreshadowing, perhaps. You move from the kitchen to the stables, where one of the carriage drivers is still talking about the bunny stampede. He's a big man with a mustache that deserves its own title, and he swears, that one of the rabbits tried to climb into Napoleon's boot. No one believes me. He grunts, offering you a carrot as if it's currency now. But I saw it. Little guy was determined, never seen a rabbit with ambition like that. You nod slowly and eat the carrot. It's surprisingly sweet. Back inside, the court is buzzing. Gossip has begun its slow elegant spread, not public mockery. No one would dare. But knowing smiles, raised eyebrows. A quiet, did you see what happened yesterday? Passed over tea. You overhear a countess joking with her maid. If only we could use rabbits in battle. They'd chase off our enemies faster than cavalry. The maid doesn't laugh. She just nods solemnly. And we wouldn't have to feed them oats. Meanwhile, Napoleon remains silent. He's had his breakfast alone. He's read 3 reports on Austrian troop movements. And he has yet to say the word rabbit out loud. Berthier, still on the verge of a career-ending meltdown. But you have questions. What was Napoleon trying to prove with the hunt? Was it a morale booster, a distraction from war fatigue, a display of his connection to the land, to nature, to his soldiers? The answer is yes and no, probably all of the above. And that's what makes the event so fascinating. Because in trying to show control, Napoleon accidentally revealed something else entirely. He was human. Vain, yes. Brilliant, definitely. But also capable of misjudging bunnies. You spend the afternoon back in the garden watching a few remaining rabbits nibble on weeds. One has a limp. Another seems to be guarding a particularly juicy cabbage leaf like it's made of gold. You sit. You breathe. You wonder if Berthier's writing up a resignation letter with a pen that smells faintly of carrots. And somewhere inside, Napoleon is probably already revising the official version of yesterday. In it, the hunt was majestic. The rabbits, wild and elusive. The emperor, triumphant. But you know the truth. You were there. You saw the fluff. You're back in your room now. The kind with drafty windows, a view of the hedgerows, and a chair that squeaks when you even think about sitting down. You lean against the sill, watching as a few errant rabbits, escapees perhaps, mosey across the lawn like they own the place. Which for one absurd afternoon, they basically did. Word has traveled fast, like faster than military dispatch fast. The hunt, which was supposed to be a quiet, dignified imperial bonding experience, is now dinner party entertainment from Paris to Vienna. But you know how it really started, with a letter. One of many Napoleon sent in spring 1807. His handwriting tight, slanted and underlined in all the wrong places. A few of those letters mentioned a celebration, something informal yet grand. A little post, Tilsit pick me up. What you didn't expect, though, was how carefully Napoleon choreographed his leisure. This wasn't just a man craving roasted pheasant and vintage wine. No, you realize now? This was someone obsessed with optics. Because tonight, as you walk toward the estate's salon for evening music, you overhear 2 minor nobles whispering about the Great Rabbit Rebellion. They're laughing into their cravats. They're not mocking Napoleon directly. Nobody does that, but they're dancing on the edge of it. And in court life, that's often more dangerous than open defiance. You pause outside the door. There's music inside, faint harpsichord, maybe a violin. But your mind is stuck on one question. What happens when the emperor becomes the punchline? Let's back up a bit. By 1807, Napoleon had already redrawn half of Europe. He'd humiliated Austria, outfoxed Prussia, and made Britain's monarchy sweat harder than a pig in a bonnet. His coronation as emperor was only 3 years behind him, and the smell of victory, gunpowder, parchment, and French cologne was still fresh, but maintaining power. That's a different beast. That's where propaganda comes in. Napoleon loved a good story, especially when it starred him. He curated his image like a Renaissance influencer, heroic paintings, carefully worded dispatches, and, when necessary, complete rewrites of events. It wasn't deception, he told himself. It was strategic narrative control. He even had artists sketch scenes from the hunt. Only in those drawings the rabbits are nowhere to be seen. Just majestic hounds, galloping hooves, and the emperor in a perfect pose. Gun raised, eyes fierce. You doubt he ever fired a shot. In the corner of one print, if you look close enough, there's a smudge. Could be a clump of bushes. Could also be a rabbit. We may never know. Historians today still puzzle over this moment. Some insist the event was exaggerated. Others say it happened exactly as described, down to the emperor trying to flee in his carriage while bunnies clung to the wheels like soft, furry barnacles. One scholar, in a paper delightfully titled Of Empires and Ears, wrote it was a rare instance of nature rejecting submission, not with violence, but with enthusiasm.
Yeah.
You like that version, so let's indulge it a little, shall we? You imagine Napoleon standing tall as the bunnies charge. At first he thinks it's funny, a little adorable, maybe even charming, but then they keep coming and coming. Their eyes unblinking, their whiskers bristling with confidence. One latches onto his coat. Another climbs into his lap. The emperor tries to shake them off. He shouts, "Shoo!" in 4 languages. He waves his hat like a flag of surrender. But the bunnies, unimpressed, they sniff his boots, they nuzzle his knees. At some point, someone, probably Berthier, screams to the carriages like it's Waterloo all over again. And Napoleon runs, not fast, not with dignity, but with purpose, because sometimes even a godlike ruler needs to retreat from 400 grams of pure fluff. That's the version you tuck into your mind as you sip watered-down wine in the salon. Someone's playing a nocturne. The room smells faintly of wax and roasted duck. You sit beside a minor duchess who fans herself with more vigor than strictly necessary. You were at the hunt, weren't you? She whispers. You nod. She leans in, grinning. Did he scream? You pause, say. Then he was surprised. She laughs. It's the kind of laugh you're not supposed to have in front of portraits. And you think again, this isn't about rabbits anymore. This is about fragility. You're watching a man built on invincibility brush up against absurdity, and not knowing what to do with it. Kings fall by sword, yes, but sometimes they trip over rabbits first. There's a deeper irony here too. Napoleon prided himself on order, on control, on bending nature, men, and maps to his will. But no amount of power changes the fact that nature occasionally says, "No thanks. Here's some chaos instead." And in this case it had ears. You return to your room late that night, the hallway lit by flickering candles. Somewhere outside, a rabbit squeaks. Not a scream, just a squeak. You swear it sounds smug. You wake to birdsong, though frankly, you're not convinced they aren't gossiping about yesterday's disaster. The sun slices through the curtains, and for a brief moment, everything feels normal again, until you glance out the window and see a single rabbit, perfectly still on the lawn, as if standing guard. It's watching the house like it's waiting for a rematch. You pull on your boots with the wariness of someone who has witnessed something truly unexplainable and head downstairs. Because today, you've got a different kind of battle ahead, the Empire's official explanation. See, empires don't just conquer land. They conquer narratives. And what happened yesterday? That's not an event, it's a public relations nightmare. So now you're part of the cleanup crew. The rumors have already begun to swirl. In Paris, someone's cousin's cousin is saying Napoleon was bitten. In Brussels, they're claiming it was a failed assassination attempt by British, trained, attack hares. In Madrid, people are laughing so hard they've nearly forgotten they're still under French occupation. And the emperor, he's pretending it never happened. Seriously, Berthier's already sent out a polite, very embellished report. His Imperial Majesty enjoyed a robust afternoon of hunting and shared a jovial feast with his loyal marshals. Not a single mention of furballs. Not even an asterisk. You're in the antechamber when Joseph Fouché arrives. The Minister of Police, that master of surveillance, and whispers. He walks like a man who knows 10 things you don't, and smells slightly of ink and trouble. Let's be clear. Fouché says, eyeing you over his ridiculous cravat. This incident will not become a story. Do you understand? You nod. But you also remember the Duchess's laugh, the smirk of the stable boy, the way that one general subtly mimed bunny ears during breakfast. It's already a story, and you suspect Fouché knows it too. Now here's the funny part too. In trying to erase the event, they make it more real. There's something about the silence that makes people lean in closer. Even Napoleon's most loyal painters have started making odd little sketches in the margins of their notebooks. Little ears, twitching noses, tiny hats with medals. In a few weeks, one of those doodles will end up in a satire paper in London. They'll name it the Lapine Uprising. You're not sure whether to groan or applaud. But the real twist, you begin to wonder if Napoleon himself, in the privacy of his chambers, has started to see the comedy. Because power can survive war. It can survive betrayal. But can it survive becoming a meme? The answer is, sort of. Historical records never officially log the Bunny incident. Not in the military dispatches, not in the emperor's journals, not even in court gossip logs. Yes, those existed, yet the story lingers, not because it's important but because it's weird. And weird stories have a way of surviving. Even now, centuries later, historians still whisper about it in footnotes and blog posts. Some try to debunk it entirely. They say, no such thing could happen to a man of Napoleon's stature. Others offer wilder theories the rabbits were drugged or cursed, or part of some elaborate political prank. One academic paper from the 1980s, published in a journal so obscure it might have only had 3 readers, suggested the rabbits were a symbol, a metaphor for imperial hubris. The author wrote, Napoleon was not attacked by rabbits. He was consumed by irony. You'd like to meet that author. But here's where things get even stranger. You receive a letter. Not official, not stamped. Just a folded parchment slipped under your door. Inside, a sketch. Napoleon, standing ankle deep in rabbits, eyes wide. There's a little speech bubble. Mon Dieu. You don't know who sent it, but you pin it to the inside of your wardrobe door anyway. A secret reminder. Because what happened that day wasn't just a fluke. It was a moment. A tiny, fluffy crack in the illusion of invincibility. You remember the look on Napoleon's face. Not terror, not rage, just surprise. The look of a man realizing that nature, even in its cutest form, doesn't follow protocol. It makes you wonder how many empires have fallen not by sword or scandal, but by 1,000 small humiliations. A misstep on marble stairs, a poorly timed sneeze, a bunny bold and uninvited. You laugh to yourself as you walk the halls again. The palace feels just slightly lighter. Like it, too, is in on the joke. And while Napoleon busies himself planning his next campaign, drawing new borders, reshuffling generals, you know that somewhere, deep down, the image of that bunny stampede lives rent-free in his brain. Maybe he'll write it off as a dream. Maybe he'll deny it happened. But maybe, on quiet nights, he chuckles. Just a little if he doesn't. Well, you will. You'd think, after the whole rabbit ambush debacle, the emperor might take a break from symbolic gestures. Maybe stay indoors for a few days. Read a book, pet a non-hostile animal. But no, Napoleon being Napoleon, he does the opposite. He organizes another event. This time it's a military parade. Because nothing says, I'm still the most feared man in Europe. Quite like polished boots, synchronized drumrolls, and a whole lot of marching in circles. It's also a not so subtle way of rewriting the public memory. People forget bunny bites when there's cannon fire and snare drums. And you? Well, you're back on duty. You're standing in the heat, uniform freshly pressed, holding a clipboard that has exactly 0 useful information. Mostly, it's just a list of generals who insisted on being introduced with their titles first. General of the left flank, Marshal of the third roadway, Supreme Pumpernickel of the artillery wing, etc. But beneath all the fanfare you notice something odd. Napoleon is unusually quiet. He's scanning the crowd, not like a man admiring his people, but like he's watching for danger. Or maybe ears. You see him flinch slightly at a boy's fur hat. You wonder, is this trauma? Is this what post-bunny stress looks like? He marches with precision, of course. He does everything with precision. But every so often, his eyes dart to the hedges, as if he half expects something to leap out with whiskers twitching. You don't blame him. Back in the stables, word among the attendants is that several of the rabbits escaped capture. A dozen, maybe more. They're out there, whispers Jax, the stable boy with an unfortunate bowl cut. Organizing. That word sticks with you. Because the more you think about it, the more plausible it sounds. Not literally, of course. You're not expecting to see a bunny congress anytime soon. But symbolically, it fits. The rabbits were, in a weird way, the first opponents to outmaneuver Napoleon in his own game. They turned a hunt into a rout. They took his power and made it silly. And in doing so, they reminded everyone that even emperors can be unseated by pause. That evening, while the band is still packing up their instruments and the last of the cannons are being rolled away, you're summoned by Napoleon himself. Again, you're not sure if this is a reward, a punishment, or just a cosmic joke at this point. He greets you in his study, the one with the gigantic map table and an unsettling amount of miniature figurines. The scent of wax and ink hangs thick in the air. He says, "You do." And then silence, long enough that you start mentally drafting your resignation. Finally, he speaks. You didn't laugh, he says, not looking at you. You blink. Pardon, sire. During the incident, you didn't laugh, the others. Some of them couldn't stop giggling. But you kept your eyes on me. You shift uncomfortably. Was afraid, sire, of the rabbits, and possibly you, he nods. Good. Fear is useful. But silence is strategic. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you nod anyway. You've learned that nodding is a useful tool around powerful people. Then he asks the last thing you expect. Do you believe animals have a plans? Now, there are so many ways you could answer this. You could go with the safe, no. Your Majesty, animals are creatures of instinct. Or the philosophical, well, perhaps in their own way they do. But what comes out of your mouth is, the ducks on the lake seem very organized. Then he chuckles. Then just like that, the tension cracks. Ducks, he repeats. Perhaps I should start there. Before facing the bunnies again, you almost ask, again, but you don't. Some questions are best left floating in the ether. Before you leave, he hands you something. A small figurine, a rabbit, carved from ivory, simple, elegant, no expression, just ears, posture, presence. Keep it, he says. A reminder. You don't know what it reminds you of more. His vulnerability or his obsession. As you step into the corridor, you realize you're carrying the most bizarre kind of war trophy. A token from a non-battle that everyone is trying to forget, yet no one actually has. You pass a group of aides gossiping in hushed tones. One of them is retelling the story badly. Apparently, in his version, the rabbits were the size of wolves. You don't correct him. Let the myths begin. That night, back in your quarters, you set the rabbit figurine on the windowsill. Outside, the moonlight paints the lawn in silver, and somewhere in the hedges something rustles. Not threateningly, just watching. You close the shutters, but not before whispering. Good night, General Bunn. You know what you didn't expect to become in this whole military career of yours? Napoleon's unofficial bunny trauma counselor. But here you are. And today, your orders are unusually specific. You're to accompany the emperor to a small countryside manor. No retinue, no fanfare, just a quiet visit. The excuse is state inspection. But everyone knows it's a wellness retreat. The kind you don't write about in dispatches. You sit beside him in the carriage. He doesn't speak for most of the ride, just stares out the window with that haunted look. Every now and then, you hear him mutter something under his breath. At one point, you think you catch the word whiskers, but it might have been whispers. It's hard to tell. The countryside is idyllic. Fields rolling in soft greens. Sheep chewing with zero ambition. A windmill turning like it has all the time in the world. And then you see the menorah, peaceful. Ivy-covered building nestled between two willow trees. A scene out of a painting, if the painter had a fondness for symmetrical bushes and suspiciously quiet birds. You enter the sitting room. A fire crackles gently. The steward, an elderly man with a voice like crumpled paper, serves tea and exits without asking questions. You suspect he's seen stranger things. Napoleon sits down, sighs deeply, and, for the first time since the incident, smiles. Nice place. You say, unsure how else to open. He nods. It doesn't remind me of battle. Then he adds, or rabbits. You're about to settle in when he pulls out a document from his coat. Letters, he says. You blink. From who? One. Ministers, soldiers, school children, one particularly angry pastry chef. All reacting to what they heard. He hands you a stack, and that's how you find yourself reading mail with the Emperor of France. One letter begins, My dear Emperor, perhaps next time try hunting snails. Another is just a drawing. Crude, messy, clearly from a child. It depicts Napoleon being chased by what looks like a very enthusiastic potato with ears. You laugh. He does not. I've become a joke, he murmurs. A punchline. You glance at him. Not to everyone. To some you're now relatable. He turns sharply. Relatable. Yeah. You got ambushed by a bunch of adorable fuzzballs. That's the kind of thing people can get behind. You're not just a conqueror. You're a man who once screamed Mon Dieu at a bunny. He doesn't respond. But he does take another biscuit, which feels like emotional progress. Later that afternoon, the two of you walk through the gardens. There's a stillness here, a hush that feels safe. Until you round the hedge and come face to face with a rabbit. It's a normal rabbit. Tiny, brown, blinking at you like you're the one who doesn't belong. You freeze. So does Napoleon. It's a standoff. The rabbit twitches its nose. Napoleon grips your arm. Do you see it? Very much so. It's alone. Seems to be. It could be a scout. You stare. You scout. He narrows his eyes. They never come alone. There's a silence. Then the rabbit hops once, twice, and disappears into a shrub. You both exhale like you've just survived a cannon barrage. See, he mutters. They're still out there. That night, back inside, the mood softens again. You sit by the fire. He pours you a bit of wine. Not a toast, just a quiet acknowledgement. Then he tells you something unexpected. I've started having dreams. Rabbit dreams. No worse. I'm in a battle. But no matter how I command, how many men I move, the enemy always wins. And when I finally see the enemy general, it's not a man, it's a rabbit. Wearing my hat, you take a sip. Slowly. History may never believe this. He chuckles. Historians are stubborn. They'll bury this. But legends, you say. He grins. Legends have long ears. Later, as you head to your guest room, you pass the library. He's still inside, flipping through a book of animals. Studying, maybe. Or just trying to make sense of things. You pause, smile, and say, "Good night," doesn't look up. But he nods. You leave him there, Emperor of France, surrounded not by maps and war, but by illustrations of hares, ferrets, and, yes, guinea pigs. You wonder as you drift off to sleep, if this is the strangest chapter of your life, or just the beginning of something even weirder. Outside, in the moonlit garden, a single rabbit hops across the lawn, and pauses as if listening. Hey, you might think that after your surreal garden encounter, things would calm down. But nope. History has a sense of humor, and it's just warming up. So here you are, following Napoleon to a friendly hunt organized by some local nobles. A normal hunting party, or so you hope. The kind where you pretend to enjoy horseback riding and eating cold venison sandwiches. Except this time, the bunnies come prepared. Picture this: dozens of fluffy, twitching creatures lining the edges of the forest path. You and Napoleon dismount, feeling more like you're in a Disney movie than a military expedition. The nobles chat about the best hunting dogs and the latest fashions, completely unaware of the furry ambush waiting just beyond their polished boots. You glance at Napoleon, who's tightening his grip on his walking stick, eyes scanning every shadow. Suddenly, a rustle, and out leaps a small army of bunnies. Not just random rabbits, these seem oddly organized. They dart around legs, hop onto horses, and even nip at trouser hems. One particularly bold bunny hops up Napoleon's coat sleeve. You swear you hear him sigh. The nobles scream, horses bolt, and you're left standing amid the chaos, trying not to laugh too loudly. It's a bizarre ballad of fur and flailing limbs. Historians still debate if this bunny battle was a freak event or some kind of practical joke by the locals. After all, raising rabbits was common. And perhaps someone wanted to give the emperor a memorable welcome. You try to reassure Napoleon, who mutters something about needing better defenses, maybe a rabbit-proof uniform. Despite the chaos, a strange camaraderie develops. Napoleon even jokes about starting a new strategy, Operation Carrot. As you help him brush off fur, you realize this is a story no one will believe, but one you'll never forget, and maybe, just maybe, those bunnies had the last laugh. By now, you've accepted a simple truth: your life has entered a chapter that no war memoir will ever adequately explain. You used to draft battle plans. Now you're discreetly researching rabbit behavior. This morning, you and Napoleon receive an invitation to attend a gathering at the Paris Museum of Natural History. It's supposed to be a quiet academic affair. Some lectures, some wine, some polite nodding at taxidermied wildlife. But you both know why you're really going. There's a new exhibit. And guess what it's about? Lagomorphs. Yes. Rabbits. You exchange glances with Napoleon as the carriage bumps along cobblestones. He's dressed impeccably, of course. Hat angled just so. But you can tell he's nervous. His eyes flick toward the door more often than usual, like he's half expecting a jackrabbit to pop out and challenge him to a duel. Inside the museum, the mood is formal and faintly musty. Guests mill around sipping wine and murmuring in that specific tone intellectuals use when pretending to understand ancient bones. You trail behind Napoleon as he drifts through the halls. He's surprisingly quiet today, almost pensive. And then you arrive at the exhibit, a series of dioramas, each depicting a different species of rabbit: European wild, Arctic hare, Angora, and even the absurdly round Polish dwarf. There's a placard on rabbits in folklore, describing how they've symbolized everything from fertility to cowardice to trickster gods. Napoleon reads this one carefully. His brow furrows. Trickster gods, he murmurs. You nod. They get around. There's a moment where you both stare at a glass case featuring a disturbingly lifelike haircut mid-bound. It's frozen in motion, glass eyes wide. as if remembering some imperial scandal it wasn't supposed to witness. Napoleon leans in. You think they're watching us? You think he's joking. But are you sure? Later, a naturalist gives a short lecture on the social structures of rabbits. How they live in warrens, how they communicate through scent and thumps, and how their breeding rate makes them almost impossible to contain once established. Sounds like insurgents, Napoleon whispers to you. You try not to laugh. But here's the kicker, a passing scholar recognizes him. Emperor, what an honor. The man gushes. Did you come for the rabbit presentation? Napoleon stiffens. You can almost hear the internal screaming. But he manages a smile. I've had personal experience. The scholar, blissfully unaware, launches into a speech about a certain breed of rabbit that has been known to form protective circles around their young and even attack intruders when threatened. You both listen intently. That night, as you're walking back through the gardens of the Tuileries, Napoleon finally says something out loud that's been brewing for weeks. They weren't just rabbits. You glance at him. They had formation, he continues. They moved with purpose. You nod slowly. Some historians still debate that. Historians weren't there, he replies. Silence settles between you for a moment. The wind stirs the trees. And then he adds, quietly, I've fought armies. I've seen fear. But never like that. You both laugh, but it's the kind of laugh you share after surviving something that doesn't quite make sense. As you reach the palace steps, Napoleon pauses. Do you think they talk about me? You raise an eyebrow. The rabbits. He nods solemnly. You pat his shoulder, only in whispers. And maybe that's true. Maybe somewhere in a quiet burrow, there's a bunny telling its grandchildren the tale of the human who once ran from a carrot crusade. You don't know what the future holds, but you're starting to suspect it involves less battlefield and more burrow diplomacy. You wake up the next morning to birdsong and the distant clatter of dishes. Everything feels normal, calm even, which is suspicious, very suspicious. Napoleon is already up, sitting by the window with a cup of something warm, not coffee. He's banned it from his personal quarters ever since the too much caffeine before a bunny ambush incident. You don't question it anymore. He looks contemplative, gazing out over the manicured palace gardens. There are no rabbits in sight. Yet, do you know what today is? He asks without turning. Monday. He ignores that. It's the anniversary of Marengo. Ah. Right, the 1800 battle where Napoleon pulled off one of his greatest military reversals, defeating the Austrians in Italy. You nod respectfully. And yet, he continues, I'm not thinking about the Austrians. I'm thinking about the rabbits. You resist the urge to sigh. Later that morning, you find yourself seated with a rather unconventional group in one of the palace salons, a zoologist, a folklorist, two very tired gardeners, and one extremely confused pastry chef. Napoleon has summoned them all for a roundtable. Today, he declares, pacing slowly between chairs, we strategize, not against Prussia, not against England, but against a deeper, furrier threat. The room is silent. Rabbits, he adds helpfully. The zoologist, a small man with glasses that keep sliding off his nose, clears his throat. Your Majesty, with all respect, rabbits are not known for their strategic intelligence. Napoleon spins dramatically. That's what they want us to think. The folklorist, to his credit, seems intrigued. He flips open a battered notebook. Actually, across many cultures, rabbits are trickster figures. In Africa, there's Brer Rabbit. In Chinese legend, the moon rabbit pounds elixirs. Even in Aztec lore, they're tied to intoxication and reverie. You interject. So they're clever, immortal, and sometimes drunk. Exactly, says the folklorist delighted. Napoleon rubs his temples. We're not dealing with ordinary creatures. The pastry chef, clearly wondering why he's been included, timidly asks if anyone wants a tart. The answer is no, but he's allowed to stay. Then the head gardener chimes in. There've been more tunnels than usual, sire. Around the edges of the east rose beds. We fill them in, but they return. Napoleon looks alarmed. They're testing our perimeter. You suggest a fence. The gardener scoffs. They chew through wood, and they don't care about aesthetics. It's true. These rabbits are not Versailles trained. The zoologist tries again. Perhaps we simply ignore them. Let nature run its course. Napoleon narrows his eyes. Would you have said the same about the Russians? The zoologist decides not to respond. By the end of the meeting, a plan has emerged. It is, by all accounts, wildly unnecessary. But you are now responsible for overseeing the construction of a bunny early warning system, complete with Rattling tin cans strung along hedges, a rotating roster of sleepy guards with carrots as bait. Artist sketch tasked with drawing any suspicious legomorphs. The sketch artist draws a rabbit in a top hat. No one laughs. The next few days are quiet, but tension simmers beneath the calm. You swear the birds are louder. The wind carries secrets. Napoleon is seen reading Watership Down in Latin. One morning you find him in the stables, talking softly to his horse. She wouldn't have run, he says, patting its flank. She would have stood her ground. You gently remind him that horses are not trained for anti-rabbit combat. He nods solemnly. We all have our weaknesses. And maybe that's the heart of it. Maybe this whole bunny saga has burrowed into something deeper. A crack in the marble statue of Napoleon's invincibility. Not a defeat, but a nibble. You start to wonder what history will remember. A leader of nations, or the man who lost a skirmish to soft paws and twitchy noses. Either way, you're beginning to understand. This isn't just about rabbits. It's about the chaos that sneaks in through the flower beds. The kind of madness that can't be measured in troop counts or treaties, only in fur and maybe laughter. There's a distinct smell in the air today. You can't quite place it. It's something between fresh parchment, mild panic, and cabbage. You ignore it. Napoleon has called another meeting. Not the official kind with generals and maps, but the unofficial kind. The ones that somehow end with 5 new titles being invented and someone writing poetry about artillery. This time he's invited a veterinarian. The vet, a round-faced woman with calm hands and very little patience for nonsense, sits across from Napoleon as he explains his growing suspicion the rabbits are organizing. You see, he gestures emphatically at a chalkboard now covered in arrows and tiny doodles of bunnies. They're testing us. First the charge. Now the silence. It's a strategy. The vet blinks. They're prey animals. Exactly, Napoleon says as if that proves his point. Prey that adapts. Prey that remembers. You glance at the chart behind him. He's labeled one rabbit, Captain Thumpington. Another is marked, the Whisperer. The vet folds her arms. Do you want my professional opinion? Napoleon leans in hopeful. You need sleep. That ends the meeting. But the next development is far more concerning. The palace kitchen is hit. It starts innocently, a missing bag of carrots, then parsley, then, unforgivably, a wedge of brie. You can't confirm it was the rabbits, but the tiny chew marks in the cheese are damning. Napoleon declares it an act of war. That night, you accompany a covert operation, led by one of his younger aides. It involves crawling through the hedges with lanterns wrapped in red silk, speaking in hushed tones and occasionally shouting, "Wait, is that a squirrel?" You spot nothing but shadows. Still, the fear is growing. You see it in the eyes of the palace staff. The way they look over their shoulders when they pass the herb garden. The way someone nervously sprinkles pepper on every patch of lettuce. Just in case. Then, one morning, a scroll arrives. No one knows who delivered it. There were no hoofbeats, no trumpet. Just a sealed parchment, tied with what suspiciously looks like a piece of twine from the stable. You break the seal. Inside is a simple drawing: a rabbit, wearing a crown underneath, one word: soon. No one laughs. Napoleon stares at it for a long time. Then, with solemn ceremony, he pins it to the intelligence board, next to a sketch of Captain Thumpington. This, he mutters, his psychological warfare. You ask the vet quietly if perhaps someone in the palace is pranking him. She sighs. That would make the most sense. Yes. But then she looks around at the twitchy servants, the disappearing produce, the mysterious new hole behind the statue of Athena. Unless it's not a prank, she adds, almost unwillingly. You don't know what to believe anymore. That afternoon, you decide to visit the historian who lives in the old West Wing. The one with more cats than books and a permanent tea stain on his cravat. He's ancient, possibly undead, and possibly the only person who can help. You explain the situation. He listens, sips tea, then say yes. The March of the Lagomorphs? You blink. He nods sagely. There's an old tale, never widely published, of a warren of rabbits who once over in a Roman villa, not for food, for control, drove the entire household mad with precision raids on lettuce, incense, and sandals. Why sandals? They hated fashion. You press for more. He gives you a dusty pamphlet dated 1749, written in shaky ink on the misbehavior of the bunny and its likely political ambitions. It's not peer-reviewed. But honestly, what is at this point? You return to the palace, pamphlet in hand, prepared to tell Napoleon everything. But he's not in his quarters, or the gardens, or the stables. You find him eventually, standing on the roof, hands behind his back, facing the horizon like some tragic painting. You offer him the pamphlet. He doesn't turn. Do you think I'm going mad? The question hangs there. You could lie. You could say this is all strategic that history will understand, that rabbits with crowns are part of the mythic tapestry of empire. Instead, you say, I think you've just had a very strange picnic. He chuckles. It's a real laugh. Short, but it cracks the tension. Maybe, he says. But I'll be ready. When they come again, I'll be ready. You nod. Of course. And as you both watch the sun dip below the trees, the shadows lengthen across the fields, and you could almost swear something rustles in the tall grass. The rustling stops. You both stand very still. Napoleon squints at the horizon. It's always the wind, he murmurs, in that kind of tone that suggests it definitely isn't always the wind. You finally convince him to come down from the roof, mostly by promising to fetch the palace baker's special apricot tart before supper. It works. He loves that tart like some men love their horses. Back on the ground, things are quieter. Suspiciously so. The guards still walk their rounds, but they seem less sharp, more contemplative. One is reading poetry aloud to a goose. You wander into the library for a bit of peace, your mind still circling the March of the Lagomorphs pamphlet. You can't tell if it's satire or prophecy. It's written in a suspiciously rhyming cadence, and the author signed it simply B.R. No further details. Just an address. Somewhere beneath the hill. Classic 18th century mystery nonsense. Still, something about it lingers. One line in particular. Shoulder not the furry curse, for they'll return, each time worse. Charming. You find Napoleon in the war room again. He's replaced all the figurines on his battle map with tiny carved bunnies. A small tag reads Operation Hopscotch. You ask what he's containment. He says. You raise an eyebrow. Containment and negotiation. That's new. You mean like a peace treaty? He nods gravely. If they're this well organized, they must have a council. Or at least a representative. Maybe a grand warren leader. You try not to laugh at the name. It sounds like a character from a woodland opera. Napoleon doesn't flinch. We will offer terms. Let us, safe passage, possibly minor tax exemptions if they agree to limit raids to non-strategic produce. You ask what counts as non-strategic. He replies, anything I don't personally enjoy. You make a note of no carrots, no beets. Apricot tart is definitely strategic. Within 2 days, the treaty offer is prepared. It's a scroll tied in green silk ribbon, carried on a silver tray, and delivered so very respectfully to the mouth of the suspected bunny tunnel behind the garden fountain. You, of course, are the one asked to deliver it. You crouch at the tunnel's edge and place the scroll inside. Nothing happens. Still nothing. You go back to the palace, bit disappointed, but the next morning the scroll is gone. In its place is a single acorn. No message, no sign. Just an acorn. Napoleon holds it like it's a holy relic. This is progress, he says. You aren't so sure. Rabbits don't typically traffic in acorns. That's more of a squirrel move. This possibility sparks a new panic. Are the squirrels now involved? Napoleon creates a subcommittee. You attend the first meeting of the Committee for Arboreal Rodent Surveillance. It's just you, a linguist, and a guy who claims to be able to speak squirrel dialects. You suspect he's a gardener who got promoted by accident. Still, it's good to be included. Later that week, another message appears, this one etched on the side of a tree trunk with incredible precision. You suspect either tiny tools or a single-minded woodpecker. The message rates, the council sees you. You really wish it hadn't. Napoleon declares martial law for about 10 minutes. Then he remembers it's his mother's name day and calls it off. The palace now operates in a strange rhythm. Meals are served with one eye on the hedges. Maps are updated with sightings of suspicious rustlings. And someone is always missing a boot. You've stopped asking where they go. The kitchen staff begin designing a decoy garden. It's filled with fake vegetables sculpted from wax and dyed sawdust. It fools no one, especially not the bunnies. But it makes people feel better. Then something strange happens. A rabbit is spotted, not just any rabbit, a massive one. The guards call it the Earl. It appears on the palace lawn just after dusk. Sitting upright, calm as anything, watches the guards, then hops away. The next day, more acorns and a small strip of red cloth. It's definitely from one of Napoleon's jackets. You are officially concerned. Napoleon, however, is thrilled. They understand negotiation. They want dialogue. He spends the rest of the afternoon designing an official rabbit embassy, which turns out to be a bench near the vegetable patch with a tiny parasol and a bowl of dandelion leaves. You have to admit it's charming. You almost think it might work. But that night, there's a terrible noise. Screaming. At least 2 hens faint. You rush outside. Something has ransacked the pastry storage. The apricot tarts are gone. Not even crumbs remain. Napoleon stares into the empty shelf, eyes wide. Thief crossed a line. He declares a state of emergency. The following morning, a message is pinned to the main gate. A perfect miniature flag, embroidered with one symbol, a bunny atop a throne of lettuce. Underneath, 3 words, "We warned you." The palace wakes up on high alert. Napoleon refuses his breakfast. Not even the backup tart concocts a smile. The room feels like it's holding its breath. Every creak of the floorboards sounds like paw steps. And as you walk through the halls, you can feel it too. Something has shifted. The bunnies are no longer the joke. They're the storm. You find yourself at the stables, feeding an increasingly neurotic horse while trying to piece together the signs. Why a miniature flag? Why apricot tarts? Why acorns? You're starting to suspect that this war is being run by a rabbit with a flair for theatrics and a disturbingly good sense of symbolism. Napoleon assembles the top minds in his court, which, unfortunately, includes a man whose only known skill is identifying cheese by smell and a woman who insists she once communicated telepathically with an owl. The cheese man suggests baiting the bunnies with Stilton. The old lady proposes asking the stars for guidance. Napoleon just rubs his temples and whispers something about retraining the cavalry to hop. You pull out the map again. Not the military one, the bunny sightings chart. It's now so full of red dots that it looks like a chicken pox diagram. You've marked the Earl's appearances, the missing tarts, and all the strange gifts. They seem to form a pattern, a loose spiral. Leading follow it. And where it leads as the old greenhouse, long abandoned, its glass mostly shattered. Ivy crawling over everything like green lace. You step inside. The air smells like dirt and secrets. In the center, beneath a shaft of dusty sunlight, sits a circle of carrots, arranged precisely, geometrically, like some kind of vegetable crop circle. You don't touch it, you just look. Then you leave. Quietly, respectfully, you tell Napoleon. He goes silent. For a long time. Then says, "We need to counter message." What follows is one of the strangest evenings of your life. Napoleon dictates a letter. Not a military order, a letter to the bunnies. In it, he acknowledges past offenses, offers a peace summit, and includes a list of available pastries for diplomatic consumption. He ends it with a drawing of himself shaking hands with a very dignified rabbit in a monocle. You fold it carefully, tuck it into a tin box lined with lavender, and deliver it to the greenhouse. When you return, you find a change in the atmosphere. It's calmer, like the palace is finally breathing again. People begin to relax. Slightly. The guards are still on edge, but they've stopped polishing their swords quite so dramatically. Someone starts baking again. Even the goose seems less anxious. Then, 2 nights later, something miraculous happens. A response. It appears on Napoleon's desk. No one saw it delivered. No one knows how it got past security. But there it is, a scroll tied in black ribbon, written in perfect cursive, slightly tilted, slightly smug. We accept the terms. On one condition. The leader must attend alone. Bring cake. You read it 3 times just to be sure. Napoleon beams. Cake. See. Civilized discourse. You're not so sure, but at this point, you'd follow him into a swamp if it meant less shrieking about missing dessert. Preparations begin. The next day, Napoleon gets dressed in his finest. His green velvet coat with the golden embroidery, the one he calls Forest Formal Ball. You pack a cake. Not just any cake. The best cake. A 3-layer hazelnut sponge with wild berry compote, decorated with sugar roses, and a single candied carrot on top. You walk with him to the greenhouse at dusk. The garden is still. You stand back as Napoleon steps inside. He disappears into the shadows. You wait. 5 minutes. 10. A breeze tickles your face. Somewhere far away, an owl hoots. Then laughter. Gentle, polite, louder. And a voice, small, high-pitched, but unmistakably eloquent. You can't make out the words, but they're talking. He's talking to them. When he returns, he's smiling. "I think," he says softly, "we may have a deal." You try not to cry from relief. Later that night, he hosts a small celebration. Nothing big. Just a few friends, some cider, and a very dignified toast to our new long-eared allies. The cheese man gets emotional. The old lady says she knew it all along. You sleep soundly for the first time in weeks. But in the morning you find a single feather on your windowsill, and under it a cherry pit. You freeze. The rabbits didn't eat cherries. You check the pantry. The cherries are missing, along with all the cashews, and a note, one that reads, "Phase 2 begins." Napoleon reads it, sighs, and mutters, "Squirrels." Knew it. You pour yourself a cup of coffee. You're going to need it. You don't want to believe it. Squirrels. Really. But then again, after bunnies held your empire hostage via pastry-based psychological warfare, you've learned not to underestimate the woodland creatures. You examine the note again. The handwriting is different, sharper, scratchier, with a tendency to underline words like begin and vengeance. There's even a tiny paw print in one corner, possibly deliberate. Napoleon, still holding his coffee mug like a lifeline, leans over your shoulder. It's the eastern grays, he whispers, as if the chandelier above might be listening. They've always hated my hat. You blink. Your hat. Wes, he nods gravely. They think it's an affront to headwear. Too triangular. You're not sure if he's joking. You're also not sure if he's sure. The day passes uneventfully, but tension simmers under the surface. Everyone's jumpy. At one point, a squirrel scampers across the courtyard wall, and 3 guards drop their weapons out of sheer reflex. One of them insists it was carrying a scroll. You start getting reports. First from the kitchen, someone, or something, has eaten through the almond stash, but only the good ones. The blanched premium Sicilian almonds, not the generic backup almonds Napoleon uses for less important snacking. Next, from the armory, a strange pattern of tiny scratches found along the sword racks, like someone's been dragging tiny, clawed fingers across polished steel. Then, from the library, several pages of Napoleon's favorite book on military logistics have been nibbled at the corners, particularly the section on flanking maneuvers. You and Napoleon stare at each other. This is premeditated, you whisper. It's a siege, he whispers back. You call an emergency cabinet meeting. Well, technically it's just you, Napoleon, a very sleepy falconer, and a woman who claims to have once dated a raccoon. She insists she can be useful. You let her stay. You spread out a new map. This time you're tracking squirrel movement. Reported sightings, missing snacks, node furniture. It's not quite a full invasion. More like a series of aggressive scouting missions. Napoleon wants to send a squirrel-sized ambassador to negotiate. You suggest maybe just a letter, so you write one. Dear most noble squirrels, we regret any perceived offenses made by our fashion choices. We would like to offer a peace muffin. Please respond with your nut preferences and available times for treaty discussions. You tie it to a chestnut with gold ribbon and leave it by the old sundial. It's gone by morning. In its place are a pinecone, carefully painted, with Napoleon's face on it. Crying. Napoleon takes it personally. You suggest a walk to calm down. Maybe some fresh air. Maybe avoid the section of the garden with the bunny's favorite sunning spot. You don't want interspecies tensions to escalate. On your walk, you come across something strange, a tiny encampment. Little tents made from torn handkerchiefs. A campfire ring of acorns. And in the center, a command post. Tiny flags poke from the ground, each one labeled the bizarre code, Operation Hazelnut, Plan B, the chimney route, Cashew Bob. This isn't just mischief, it's strategy. Napoleon, now crouching next to you, murmurs. They're running drills. You both freeze as a rustle comes from the bushes. A squirrel darts out, pauses, stares at you, then dashes away, but not before dropping a crumpled napkin. Written on it, consider this a warning. You go back to the palace and double the guard. The cheese man insists on laying out bee traps. The old lady starts drawing protective runes with jam. You gently suggest she stop before attracting wasps. That night, you and Napoleon have a long talk over tea. You ask him if he regrets anything. He considers, then shrugs. I probably shouldn't have called them rats with better PR in that one speech. You both sip in silence. Then the chandelier shakes. It's subtle at first, just a gentle rattle. Then, clang, a rain of acorns pours down into the parlor. Squirrels, from the ceiling, they descend like fuzzy, well-coordinated paratroopers, squeaking commands, launching walnut projectiles, and moving with synchronized chaos. You duck behind an armchair, flinging a sofa cushion for cover. Napoleon grabs a baguette and uses it like a baton, fending off a particularly aggressive red squirrel with a scar across one eye. Why is that one wearing an eye patch? You yell. Sim yells back. The bunnies arrive. Drawn by the noise, they enter with alarming grace, forming a half circle around the fireplace. Their leader, the Earl, hops forward, surveys the scene, then slowly shakes his head. Disappointed but not surprised. He raises a single paw, and just like that the squirrels stop all at once. They freeze, mid-gnaw, mid-leap, nut throw. Then in eerie silence they back away, leave, one by one, slipping out the windows, up the chimney, through the smallest cracks. When they're gone, all that's left is a note. We were testing you. You failed, but the bunnies have vouched for you. For now, you collapse onto the rug. Napoleon, flat on his back, stares at the ceiling. Well, he says, At least they didn't take the espresso machine. You want to argue that they may have, in fact, left a squirrel inside it. But you're too tired. The bunnies hop out with quiet dignity. Later that night, as you clean acorn shells out of your pockets, you realize something. You're not in a war. You're in an ecosystem. A very strange, politically active, snack-motivated ecosystem. And you're the newest member. You make a note to stock more hazelnuts, just in case. You start the morning with a new kind of wariness. Not the exhaustion that comes from paperwork, or battle, or one too many late-night croissant feasts. No, this is the psychological kind. The kind that builds when you realize your political alliances now include rabbits, conditional squirrel truces, and a butler who may or may not have joined a secret marmot society. Napoleon enters the breakfast room, wearing an apron. It says, "Don't talk to me until I've had my battle plan." You decide not to talk. Instead, you sip your lukewarm tea and stare at the empty chair across from you, where a small trail of sunflower seeds has been laid out like some sort of peace offering or bait. You're not sure anymore. "I've had an idea," Napoleon says suddenly. You look up. You're always a little nervous when he says that. "We need to restore our honor." You raise an eyebrow. "You against the squirrels?" "No," he says, stirring his porridge. "Against history, you wait. We shall rewrite the past," he says, dramatic fork pointing included. "We'll host a reenactment of the bunny incident." Your spoon clinks loudly against your bowl. You want to relive the bunny attack. He nods. "But this time we direct it. Control the narrative. We invite guilty scholars, rabbits, even squirrels if they promise not to chew the tapestries." You honestly don't hate the idea. It's absurd, yes, but in the way that's so far gone, it might just become a historical fever dream people whisper about for centuries. You're in. First step: recruiting actors. Unfortunately, due to your current political situation, the only performers willing to work with Napoleon are a traveling troupe of experimental mime poets and one man who insists he once was a rabbit in a past life. You hold auditions in the palace courtyard. The mimists, yes, they call themselves that, present a 10-minute silent interpretation of The Duality of Carrot. It involves a lot of dramatic hopping 3 fog machines and someone falling into the koi pond. Napoleon claps. You're not sure if it's ironic. The rabbit man simply sits in the grass, nibbling a celery stick, and mutters, "They're watching." You hire him immediately. Costumes are a problem. You've got plenty of historical uniforms. Some real, some with sequins left over from Napoleon's failed disco phase. But not enough rabbit outfits. So you do what any reasonable 19th century palace staff would do. You raid the curtain closet. By the end of the day, you've fashioned 12 surprisingly majestic bunny capes from old drapes, complete with velvet ears and golden sashes. The squirrels approve, leaving a chestnut in your boot as a token of respect. Rehearsals begin. The script, co-written by Napoleon and the Rabbit Man, is well ambitious. There's a monologue titled Ode to the Fluffy Onslaught, a choreographed interpretive dance of defeat, and a finale in which the actor playing Napoleon gets gently pelted with marshmallows instead of pastries. For safety, you cast yourself as the narrator. It's the only role that requires dignity and no hopping. Opening night arrives. The courtyard is transformed into a surreal mix of battlefield and banquet. Decorative cannonball-shaped meat pies line the tables. Guests arrive in carriages, looking vaguely confused but intrigued. Some whisper, "Is this political satire?" Others murmur, "Is this an immersive dining experience?" The squirrels arrive in the rafters, silent, watching, occasionally munching walnuts. The bunnies, naturally, are guests of honor. They get front row seats, tiny chairs, and cucumber water. The Earl wears a boatie. The play begins. You deliver your opening lines with Shakespearean gravitas. On this day the emperor fell not by blade, but by the bounce of one too many bunnies. Jaspists. Lauder. One person weeps, possibly from confusion. Napoleon, playing himself of course, reenacts the chase scene with dramatic flair, leaping over picnic baskets and yelling lines like, "I command you to halt, fluffy insurgents," while being chased by a dozen actors in curtain capes. It's brilliant. The Rabbit Man plays the lead bunny with haunting sincerity, delivering a silent, twitch-nosed performance that genuinely moves several people to tears. The mimists break into a final interpretive piece called Soft Rebellion, during which they surround Napoleon in slow motion, raising plush carrots above their heads as a symbol of victory and restraint. The curtain falls. Silence. Then thunderous applause. You did it. You turned defeat into theater. Napoleon bows, smug and satisfied. The bunnies nod in approval. Even the squirrels drop a polite acorn or two. Later that night, you lie on the grass, looking up at the stars. Napoleon joins you, brushing pastry crumbs from his sleeve. I feel better, he admits. Lighter, bah. You turned a public humiliation into performance art, you say. That's therapy. He chuckles. You think the history books will remember this? He asks. You grin. They might not have a choice. The squirrels were recording it. Bah, he pauses. Wait. What? Sure enough, you both glance up to see a line of squirrels on the balcony, holding tiny recording devices. One of them adjusting a tripod. You can't help but laugh. The world is strange now. But somehow it works. You've made peace with rabbits, diplomacy with rodents, and possibly invented a new form of absurdist theater. And for once you feel proud, until a seagull swoops down and steals Napoleon's hat. He sighs. You sigh. Tomorrow, you mutter. We talk about the seagulls. He nods solemnly. You both lie back in silence. And in the distance, someone plays a soft melody on a carrot flute. The next morning, you awaken to the sound of silence, which, given your recent weeks, is either a very good sign or a very suspicious one. You tiptoe to the window. The courtyard is empty. No rabbits, no squirrels, no mimes hurling interpretive snowballs at ghostly metaphors. Just a few feathers drifting lazily in the breeze and Napoleon pacing in the garden like he's lost both a kingdom and a sock. You throw on your coat and head down. Here will you ask? Napoleon sighs, gesturing to the sky. Go on. All of them? The rabbits, he nods, left a knot. Something about needing to find themselves. Also, a tiny gift basket with lavender and a very small monocle. You raise an eyebrow. And the squirrels? Unclear, he mutters. They vanished just after dawn. Took their cameras, their acorns, and oddly enough, one of the chandeliers. You're not even surprised anymore. There's an eerie calm over the palace, like the morning after a very polite uprising. Napoleon seems adrift, like a man who's just hosted the weirdest dinner theater in history and now has to figure out how to top it. So, naturally, you suggest a trip. Somewhere quiet. You say, remote, preferably with no sentient animals. Napoleon Alps. The Alps. Too cold. Corsica. Too family. Belgium. You pause. Didn't that go poorly last time? He waves it off. New leaf. I've grown. You squint at him. You threw a baguette at a diplomat there. I was provoked. He said you had unusual posture. Napoleon shrugs. Still counts. You end up settling on a quaint village by the sea, far from any capital, any army, and, most importantly, any dramatic rodents. The carriage ride is unusually peaceful. No sudden duels, no impromptu poetry slams. Just clouds, croissants, and Napoleon occasionally humming a tune that might be the Bunny Plays theme song. The inn is charming. Wood beams. Cracked pottery. A fireplace that smells like old toast and pine needles. You check in under false names. You're now Pierre Lequiet, and Monsieur shuffles, and Napoleon insists on the second one. You go with it. The days pass slowly, wonderfully. You walk along the shore, discuss absurd hypotheticals. What if Waterloo had been held in a forest of ham? And try to learn fishing, though Napoleon quickly declares it too passive-aggressive. Evenings are spent by the fire. You read. He writes. You don't ask what he's writing. But one night, you peek. It's a play. Tentatively titled Bunnies of Destiny, a musical reckoning. You pretend not to see. Then one morning a letter arrives. Delivered by Seagull. It drops onto the breakfast table with a dramatic plop, startling Napoleon into spilling his coffee. The note is tiny. Folded thrice. In delicate handwriting. Clearly rabbit script. It reads, The world remembers what it's shown. You showed them something different. Good job. Monsieur shuffles. Napoleon stares at it. You both sit in silence. A beat passes. Then he says, I miss the squirrels. You chuckle. I never thought I'd hear that sentence. But you know what he means. The palace. The chaos. The feeling of being in something. Strange, meaningful, ridiculous, alive. So you make a decision. You return to the palace, but not as rulers. Not as generals. As caretakers of a new kind of history. You reopen the theater. You launch the Absurd Reenactment Society. You host monthly performances. Sometimes they're about historical battles, with all the drama and none of the gore. Sometimes they're about pastries that change politics. Once you stage a ballad about treaties and marmalade. It's a hit. People come from all over, not just for the shows, but for the spirit of them. For the chance to remember that history isn't just dusty dates and angry portraits. It's strange. It's petty. It's full of moments where the fate of empires turned on something as ridiculous as a stampeding wave of rabbits. And it's those moments, the ones you'd never believe unless you were there, that remind you how hilariously fragile it all is. Napoleon is happy. Or at least, more himself than he's been in years. He still writes. he still schemes. But these days his plans involve stage lighting and velvet curtains instead of cannonballs. You think it suits him. One night, after a particularly ambitious play involving fog machines, flying toast, and a cameo from the Earl of Bunnies, you sit together beneath the stars. Do you think people will remember this? He asks. You nod. Not just remember, you say, but fall asleep to it. He laughs. A real one, not the rehearsed, performative chuckle of a man trying to conquer dinner. But something lighter. And for the first time in a long while, you both sit in the quiet, not with a sense of waiting but of being exactly where you're supposed to be. A small palace, a stranger's story, a second chance. So, you've staged the world's first interpretive historical rabbit opera. You've redefined post-exile retirement for emperors. And somehow, you've turned the Palace of Compi into lease of threatening theater since someone accidentally lit a performance of King Lear entirely with birthday candles. You'd think things might calm down now. But no, because now you have groupies. Not for Napoleon. Not even for you. But for the rabbits. The story of the bunny attack has made the rounds. At first just local gossip, then pamphlets. Then somehow, a traveling puppet show that exaggerated the facts just enough to make it more believable. So apparently in the puppet version, one of the rabbits talks like a pirate and leads a breakdance revolution. A people arrive at the palace daily. Is this where the rabbits defeated Napoleon? Can I touch the cannon-shaped carrot? Do you sell replicas of the bunny monocle? You glance at Napoleon. He's building a model theater. Out of sugar cubes. His only response is a wary shrug. You decide to do what anyone would do in your position, lean all the way into it. The gift shop opens the following week. Among the top-selling items, official bunny battle map, largely a watercolor of chaotic squiggles, Napoleon plushies with detachable hats, a children's book titled Napoleon, the Emperor Who Met His Match. Every Tuesday you host Bunny History Hour, where kids dress up as historical figures and the bunnies reenact treaties by hopping in patterns. It's adorable and deeply confusing to any actual historians. But let's be honest, they're already confused. Because even among the endless absurdities of history, this one is special. There are no grand military strategies to analyze, no ancient tomes to decode. Just a French emperor, a bunch of over-ambitious rabbits, and a group of theater-loving squirrels who somehow made it all feel like fate. One afternoon, as you're organizing props backstage, you hear Napoleon rehearsing lines. He still stumbles over Act T2, the big monologue, where the character, loosely based on himself, realizes he's been chasing the wrong kind of legacy all along. You poke your head around the curtain. Need help, he waves a script. The audience needs help, with patience. You grin. Later that night, the performance goes surprisingly well. Not perfect. The fog machine malfunctions and fills the room with the scent of overcooked asparagus. One of the rabbits gets stage fright and hides in a hat. A chandelier swings a little too dramatically and lightly taps an audience member's biguint, which is promptly declared a national incident. But the crowd laughs, they cheer. They don't want flawless, they want weird, honest, human. After the curtain closes, a young student approaches, wide-eyed, a notebook clutched in their hands. Is it true? They ask. Did the rabbits really win? You glance at Napoleon. He raises an eyebrow. You turn back to the kid. Well, you say, depends what you think winning looks like. The kid nods thoughtfully. I think not conquering things sounds harder. You offer a gentle smile. Exactly. That night, you and Napoleon sit by the fire again. The sugar cube model theater is complete. It's already starting to slump. But you both pretend not to notice. I used to think glory meant statues, he murmurs. You nudge the miniature velvet curtain. Turns out it's just a sticky in theater. He chuckles. Sticky glory, that should be my memoir title. You make a mental note to design a cover. He sips his drink. You know, people used to follow me for power. And now, no, they follow me for puppets, plush rabbits, and a deeply symbolic fog machine. You nod. Progress. There's a long, peaceful silence. Then he adds, God, honestly, I think I'm happier now. You don't say anything. You just let the quiet speak for itself. Outside, a soft breeze rustles the trees. Somewhere in the woods, you swear you hear a squirrel narrating a play. Maybe history doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it does in core performances, and those can be even more fun. If someone had told you months ago that your full-time job would involve rabbit-themed tourism, emotionally vulnerable ex-emperors, and community theater, well, you might have believed them. You've made worse career choices, but this is different. This isn't just absurdity for absurdity's sake. This is healing in slow motion, wrapped in cotton balls and held together with papier-mâché stage props. And tonight, something strange is happening in the air. There's a sense of finality. You feel it as you string paper lanterns above the courtyard. You feel it when the bunnies hop more slowly than usual, as if sensing the shift. And you definitely feel it when Napoleon asks out of the blue, "Do you think I should leave soon?" You stop mid-lantern tie. "Leave as in back to real life." He nods, turning a sugar cube over in his hands like it's a crystal ball. "I've been here long enough to forget what real life felt like." You look around. The modest theater stage, built with reclaimed wood and more ambition than logic. The chicken, wire bunny statue now covered in moss and questionable stickers. The backstage rack of costumes, including 3 different versions of Napoleon but with a tutu. This is real life now. Just a different version. "What would you even do out there?" you ask. He shrugs. "Right, speak. Maybe not try to conquer anything." You smirk. "Big dream chuckles." He chuckles. Huge. Later that evening, the final performance of Bunny Waterloo, the happening, takes place. The crowd is enormous. People from nearby villages, a few confused travelers, even a group of university historians pretending to be here for research. You're backstage, making last-minute adjustments to a carrot chandelier that won't stop spinning like a disco ball. Napoleon stands in full costume, not as himself, but as a bunny. Specifically, a wise old rabbit general who learns that friendship is the best strategy. He delivers his lines with heartfelt precision. The audience is silent, then sniffling, then laughing, then on their feet in a standing ovation. Afterward he bows. Not his usual military precise nod, but something softer. A little crooked, a little human. You find him in the green room. The barn behind the stage. He's sitting on a hay bale, unzipping his rabbit costume. You offer him a drink. He raises it in a toast. "To bunnies." "To bunnies." You as a pause. Then he says, "I think I'm ready." You don't argue. You don't ask if he's sure. Because you see it in his posture, the way his shoulders have finally settled somewhere below his ears. He's found closure. Not in exile. Not in war. But in a ridiculous rabbit reenactment that no history book will ever believe. And that's kind of beautiful. The next morning you help him pack. It's not much, a few letters, some souvenirs, a small painted portrait of a rabbit in a bicorn hat. You walk him to the edge of the village. The villagers gather to wave goodbye. The bunnies line up, as if saluting. He turns to you. "Will you be all right here?" You grin. "Someone has to keep the fog machine from exploding." He nods. Then, quietly, he says, "Thank you for helping me not be the man I used to be." You reach into your pocket and press something into his palm. It's a sugar cube hand, painted with a tiny smiley face. "Keep this," you say. "In case you need a reminder." He laughs. And then he's gone. You stand at the gate a long while, watching the road wind out of sight. Eventually, the villagers disperse. The bunnies hop back into the tall grass. And you go back to the theater. Because the next performance is already in rehearsal. This one's called Julia's Seizure, a bunny tragedy in 5 acts. It's going to be ridiculous. And you're going to love every second of it. Hey, here we are. The final chapter of this bizarre yet oddly charming adventure with Napoleon and his unexpected bunny adversaries. You've been through it all. The pomp of empire, the odd rituals of rabbit hunting, the chaotic battle, the retreat into theater, and now this quiet moment of reflection. Tonight, you lean back in your chair, the soft glow of the lanterns flickering around you, the faint hum of crickets joining the night's lullaby. It's hard to believe that something as peculiar as a rabbit invasion could bring so much peace to a man known for war. You think about how history usually paints Napoleon as a relentless conqueror, a man driven by ambition and power. But here, in this softly lit village, the story is different. It's about patience, about unexpected friendships, about finding humor in life's strangest moments. You recall the curious fact you learned earlier: rabbits, despite their innocent looks, were once used in medieval Europe to test the quality of cloth. Apparently, a rabbit's delicate paws would reveal flaws humans might miss. Who would have guessed that these little creatures, once accidental soldiers, were also quality inspectors in another life? It's a reminder that history isn't always about grand battles and heroic speeches. Sometimes it's about the quiet, the overlooked, the gentle oddities that make life richer. And speaking of oddities, historians still debate why Napoleon agreed to the rabbit hunt in the first place. Some say it was a miscommunication. Others believe it was a bizarre attempt at leisure gone wrong. Whatever the truth, you smile knowing that even the greatest minds get tangled in the unexpected. As the night deepens, you feel the soft weight of sleep pressing gently against your eyelids. You think about the bunnies hopping away in the fields, the actors packing up their costumes, the sugar cube theater slowly dissolving into memory. And you realize this story, strange as it is, has something important to say, that sometimes the most memorable moments in history come not from glory, but from laughter. You let out a slow, contented sigh, the world outside quiets, your breathing slows, and now, you drift, carried gently on the whisper of 1,000 soft paws. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams be as curious and calm as this tale. The night stretches out before you like a velvet blanket, warm and endless. Your thoughts become lighter, as if floating on a gentle breeze. The stories you've heard settle into the quiet corners of your mind, weaving themselves into dreams yet to come. Outside, the world sleeps in slow motion, every leaf, every shadow, every tiny breath of wind whispering peace. And you, wrapped in the soft glow of twilight, are already halfway there, drifting in the calm embrace of sleep's gentle arms. Rest well until tomorrow's stories call you once again.